That's the other day, and the best I could get to was like 78. And that's a precipitous decline. I need to practice. 150, that's incredible. I took a typing class too. You had to take typing when I was in high school. And you know what? It's the most valuable thing I learned in high school. You got to think, all things being equal, you're looking at hiring two people. They're equally smart, equally capable, equally competent. One of them can type 3 times as fast as the other. When it comes to doing work on a computer, they can accomplish 3 times as much, given the exact same tool set. Right? Like, it's a... Oh, yeah. Oh, I learned properly. Okay, you...
Why me?
Because you're distracting me. Because now I'm talking about typing, and what I should be talking about is Lesson 3.1, Intro to Animal Systems. There we go. See, it's doing it though again, the ever so slightly curved line that I just don't understand why anyone would ever want that. It's still even got like a little curve. I can't handle it. Like, why? Why wouldn't it just assume that I want a straight line? Why would it, you know what this guy probably wants? He probably wants a line that is going up by like half a degree. That's what he wants. I'm going to give it to him. Thank you, OneNote. It's infuriating. Anyway, okay. So if you remember back to Unit 1, we talked about the hierarchy of life, and we said that one of the biggest, broadest categories we can put life into is the first division we make, which is our 3 domains. And who can remind me what the domains are? Eukaryota, yep.
Prokaryota?
No, actually. Prokaryotes are divided into 2 domains.
Oh. It's
Archaea and
bacteria,
sometimes called eubacteria. Yeah, very good. In other words, like the true bacteria. Very good. So, with animals, we belong to which domain? We belong to Eukaryota, which means what?
Complex.
Yeah, so they can be multicellular. Animals are multicellular, absolutely. So we belong to domain Eukaryota. Okay, so fundamentally that means that complex cells with organelles, right? To which kingdom do animals belong? Yeah, very good. Kingdom, Animalia. And animals are multicellular. What's it mean to be multicellular? Yeah.
Your cells are complex.
That's what it means to belong to domain Eukaryota. What's it mean to be multicellular? What's multi mean? Multiple, which means? Yeah, what's multiple mean? More than one, yeah, many, multiple, right? So we are made of more than one cell, and all animals are made of many cells. So, but not just that, so they're made of many cells, true. All those cells share the same DNA. But I mean, that is also true of a colony of bacteria, at least until mutations start to happen. And yet, despite that, we don't say that a bacterial colony is multicellular. So what's the difference? Why are we multicellular and we consider ourselves a single organism, but a bacterial colony we think of as just a group of bacteria? What's the difference? Why do we consider an animal multicellular? Because it's made of a bunch of cells that all share the same DNA. But those bacterial colonies we looked at under the microscope aren't considered multicellular despite the fact that they are also a big group of cells that all share the same DNA.
They're not part of the same organism.
But why not? Like, aren't we sort of, you could say, well, they're all stuck together, right? Like, we're all stuck together, but so are they. They made a little sphere, right? That's stuck together. And we're not all stuck together, because if you cut me, I'm going to bleed, and that's going to be a bunch of my cells just spilling all over the place, right? Don't do that, but don't cut me, bruh. But like, if you did, which you wouldn't, of course, because I'm tough, you'd be scared. First thing people notice about me, that guy is tough. I'm not going to try to cut him. He'd probably like knock me right over. I mean, you're saying that sarcastically as though you would. That's problematic. You and Angela been hanging out. Well, you should probably consider your life choices. So I stand by it. So seriously, what else is going on here? And the other thing that's going on here is those cells aren't identical. They have the same DNA, but they aren't identical. All your cells, fun fact, not identical, which of course you know intuitively because you aren't just a big blob of cells. You have a nose, and you have ears, and you have hair, and you have eyes, and those things all just look different. You have muscles, and you have a liver, and you have a spleen. You have a spleen. Did you know that? Now you know. You have a spleen. And you got kidneys. How many? 3. I thought somebody stole one of my kidneys. I think you can steal someone's kidneys. I don't think you can get a third put in. You have 2 kidneys. Where are they located? You have another side, lower back. Lower back. And but they're posterior. They're not anterior, right? They're on your dorsal surface, not your ventral surface, right? So so those cells aren't identical, but serve specific functions. Why did I say serve? That's not the word I meant to use. I need to go get my cheat sheet. But perform different functions. So what makes you different is that you can't survive as a human with just some of your cells. So if you take a human and you say, okay, we're going to take Orlando, but to simplify things, we're only going to take his white blood cells. And you just burn all the rest of my cells in a pile. You know what you don't have anymore? Me, because it just doesn't work that way. You have to have more than just your white blood cells. And you can't say, okay, well, we're just going to take his chondrocytes, like his bone cells, and everything else can go. Then you would have a skeleton of me, but that wouldn't be me, right? For me to exist as an organism, it's not just that I am a bunch of cells, it's that I require all of those cells working in concert to function. And if one set of them fails to function, the whole organism will either suffer or, likely, the whole organism will stop to function altogether. And we call that, of course, dying, right? So all of those cells must work together in concert. So the reason a bacterial colony isn't multicellular is because even though it may be a big clump of bacterial cells, each one of them is self-sustaining. If you killed every single bacterium in a bacterial colony except for one, any one, it doesn't matter which, and make sure that one survives and exists on nutrient medium, you'll get your bacterial colony back. Does that make sense? One cell doesn't depend on any others. But that's not like you. You require all of your cells to function. Not each individual cell, but all of your types of cells. Does that make sense? So a single skin cell isn't integral. They die all the time. But having skin cells is integral. You can't do without them. A single muscle cell isn't integral. They die all the time. But having muscle cells is integral. Interestingly, other cells don't regenerate, right? Like all of your neurons, all of your brain cells, you make new ones as you form new neural pathways, but you won't replace old ones. And so if they die, and that little bit of your brain is gone, which is why me with the whole bovine spongiform encephalopathy, the old mad cow, is a problem for me, right? Because I'm getting the old spongy brain, and that's why I can't remember the word attendance anymore. But yeah, so we need those cells working together in concert. And this leads us to the concept that we should have talked about, I hope you talked about, in grade 10, which is cell specialization. How many of you did I teach grade 10 to? Anyone? Oh, there we go. How was I? How did I do? I'll take it. Hurt my feelings a bit, but okay, I'll run with it. Yeah, did I talk about cell specialization? I mean, you're here, so I couldn't have been too terrible. You didn't like run away screaming, going, "Oh my God, I hate science now." I mean, maybe you did, but you got over it.
You covered it like briefly. You're just like, okay, this is what it's called. Moving on.
Cool, I can live with that. That doesn't quite ring a bell with me, but that's okay. What's this term mean? Specialization. What's it mean to specialize? Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't refer to being special. It refers rather to being specialized or to having a specific function. It refers to specificity of function. In other words, it refers to having a role, a job. Does that make sense? To get into histology, which we're going to talk about a little bit, that's a new thing I want to build into this course that I've never done before. We want to start looking more at cells. I want to get the microscopes out, and when we talk about muscles, I want to get a chance to actually look at muscle cells. When we talk about blood, I want to get microscopes out and look at blood cells. Because it's interesting to note that every animal starts off as how many cells? Yeah, 1. I mean, it's interesting. We start off as 2, but actually then those 2 cells, which are not a new organism, come together and they form a new organism, right? So it starts off as, see, that off is doing no business. It just starts as a single cell. So remember that the 2 parental gametes, which are, what's another word for gametes? Yeah, very good. 2 parental sex cells, so specifically sperm and ova, if we're talking about a human for sure, form a zygote. This is sexual reproduction. Why did I put that in brackets when what I wanted to put in brackets was sexual reproduction? I'll tell you why. Amateur hour. All right, zygote is a new term there, but zygote is just that first cell. Before we'd even consider something to be an embryo, which is the developing animal, that first cell, which is just a fertilized ovum, is called the zygote. And of course, in a human then, that zygote will implant, right, in the endometrial lining of the uterus, and you'll get formation of the placenta and the formation of the embryo. Interestingly, the placenta actually belongs to who? Is placenta a part of mom's body or part of the newborn's body? We're just saying, what is it? Whose cells is it? Is it mom's cells or baby's cells? It's baby's cells, yeah. So the placenta actually is obviously growing inside the woman's body, right? It's growing up against, but the placenta is actually the interface. So baby is there, baby has the umbilicus, and the umbilicus is attached to the placenta. The placenta is growing up against the uterine lining, and the uterine lining just is a massive tangle of blood vessels that develops each month, and it develops even further if pregnancy occurs. If it doesn't, you slough off that lining, and then everything starts again in your next cycle. You're welcome. But if you become impregnated, that remains there, and the placenta is basically the same. It's just a big mass of blood vessels. And then what happens is they intermesh with each other. So blood is never transferred between them, but mom's blood and baby's blood get just one cell away from each other, just the wall of those 2 sets of blood vessels, and they can transfer oxygen and sugar and hormones and antibodies and bad things, right, like all sorts of chemicals. But baby consistently gives waste products to mom's blood, so mom can excrete waste for baby, and mom is constantly providing, this embryo with new nutrients, right? It's exchange. But the placenta itself actually belongs to the newborn, which is why the woman's body expels it after birth. They used to call that the afterbirth. I don't know if that's a term they still use. But the delivery of the placenta. So every animal starts out as that single cell, and then every cell inside of an animal is the result of mitotic division of that first cell. Of course, when I say the word mitotic, what does that mean? Yeah, undergoing mitosis. So mitotic division. So you started out as a single cell, and then that cell will have undergone mitosis and become two cells. And interestingly, as early as that first division, one of those cells is destined to become your skeleton and your spinal cord and your nervous system. And another one is destined to become your muscle and your soft tissues. Already, they are starting to specialize, which is pretty crazy. If you ever get a chance to study development, I took just one developmental biology class where we still focused on human development, and it was fascinating because you have to turn one cell into millions of different types of cells, and altogether trillions and hundreds of trillions of cells, but of all different types. All starts as just one. Pretty crazy. We'll make note in case you don't know there. If you do, that's fine. So we say mitosis. We start with we usually use the term parent cell, but instead I'm just going to say, well, I guess because I don't want to make it seem like it's the cell from your parents. So instead I'm just going to say original cell. And after mitosis, we end up with two clones. And of course, what can happen after that? Each of those can split and form another clone, right? And so on and so forth. But the thing to take away is that all of these, in terms of genetics, these are all genetically
identical.
Okay, oh, you guys are good. Wow. It's amazing. You just thought of exactly the word I was going to use.
I know.
It's incredible. But even though each cell is genetically identical, Max, I'm in your seat. I will move. You're welcome. Even though each cell is genetically identical, our epigenetics, or our epigenome, determines which genes get expressed, which genes get turned on and turned off inside of a cell. And the result is that they're going to form different functions. Epigenetics. You can almost imagine it like this, and this is a really clumsy, fraught analogy. But it would almost be like, have you ever thought to yourself, maybe it requires a degree, I can honestly say I never have thought this. Maybe thinking this would require some degree of megalomania. But have you ever thought to yourself, oh, it would be great if I could clone myself and have another version of myself who did all the laundry, and maybe another version of myself who did all my homework, another version who could spend all that time teaching those rotten kids I have to be around. I could have one dedicated just to feeling horribly hurt by Angela all the time, right? You could just clone yourself and have them do all different jobs, right? You ever thought that? Interesting.
Especially when I'm just waking up, and then I'll think the physical body of me is gonna go do something, and the mental is gonna sit here.
And wouldn't it be nice if they could just both stay there, and instead you could be Oh, Annie 2, it's time to go to school. Oh, Annie 3, I think you need to pack your lunch.
But like it happens.
Annie
really
4,
often
don't
when I
forget
wake
to
up.
vacuum.
It's such like a weird out of body feeling. So I'm like, I can't get the physical part of me to go.
This is true. Yeah. Which is why I suggest a program of cloning. But now imagine if you did that, if there was one of your clones who like was going to be in charge of, I don't know, doing farm labor, you'd probably want that clone to get really big and strong, right? And if there's another one you wanted to specialize in getting into tight spaces, you might want to make sure they stayed good and scrawny, right? And there's another one who was going to, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? If there's one who was going to do your schoolwork, you'd probably want them to focus on like hitting the books and being really smart, right? Does that make sense? It would make more sense if you're going to do all this cloning, even though they're all clones. Is there any reason one of your clones couldn't focus on getting big, huge, strong, and buff? Sure they could, right? And could another one of your clones focus on getting real smart? Yeah, probably. Could another one focus on developing like an incredibly sharp wit for arguing with people? Like, I don't know, all the things you might want. I don't know. Maybe you want one to be like really empathetic, so it could take care of being empathetic for you, so you can be busy being selfish as teenagers are wont. I don't know. But does that make sense? The same thing happens here, where just because they all have the same genes doesn't mean that every cell in your body has to use the same genes. Does that make sense? Every cell in your body has a gene to like build hemoglobin that can absorb oxygen and carry it around. But do we want every cell in your body doing that? No, we just want some of them, specifically your blood cells, right? And all the other cells in your body, that's not really helpful to make that gene. So we don't want them to use that gene, even though they have it. Does that make sense? And we want some genes to build this protein called actin and myosin that lets it stretch and contract. Those are our muscle cells. But that wouldn't be useful in our red blood cells. We don't need them to swim around flexing while they carry oxygen. You know what I mean? Though if they were male red blood cells, you know they would. They'd be like, hey, look at me, carrying all this oxygen. You know, I don't know. Anyway, so this is the basic idea that, and I'm just going to kind of restate that. Every cell has every gene. But they express only the genes they need. And express is just a fancy way of saying they use. Now, how the heck is that all managed? And the short answer is we have no idea. I shouldn't say we have no idea. We have some idea, we have some information, but we certainly don't fully understand epigenetics. We don't fully understand gene expression. How it is that as early as that second division, your cells start saying, okay, we're going to use these genes and do these jobs, but not use those ones. There's some kind of map. There's some kind of thing inside. In fact, the most recent Nobel Prize was for a group of scientists who did some work on a type of RNA that is used in part to control gene expression, used in part to determine which genes get turned on in a cell and which genes don't. We have some information about that, but there is a world of studies still to be done there. And like 25 years ago when I was in high school, nobody was using the word epigenetics except I'm sure like geneticists in the field. Now that's a much broader field of study that we're starting to look at. There's a lot of research still to be done there. Again, it's hard to stress just how important like how incredibly complex you are. You have more cells in just your body than people who've ever lived, let alone people who've studied science. You know what I mean? So the idea that anyone can have a full grasp of how all your cells work just isn't realistic because it's just so much complexity there. I see a hand, yeah. Of course, yeah, absolutely. So we're going to shorten all that by saying the regulation of cell specialization is really complicated. We're going to accept that as being enough. Okay. So what are the broad types of cells? And speaking very broadly in the human body, in animal systems, there's a bunch of different ways you can do this, but there's kind of a classic distinction into 4 types of somatic cells that we'd look at. Does anyone remember what the term somatic cells means? Yeah.
Like non-sex cells.
Yeah, very good. So does anyone remember what the categories of somatic cells are, the categories of non-sex cells? In animals. A very important one. Muscle cells. What do they do? Well, we'll get to it in a minute. Next type. Nervous cells. Blood cells fall into the next category, but it's a broader category than just that. No? Connective cells. Which blood cells has always felt to me like a loosely falls into this definition, but that's where they put them. And then fourthly, yeah.
I was going to say something.
Okay, don't. What's the next type? No, I just made it up for the moment. How do you pronounce that? Yeah, very good. Epithelial. Have you heard of epithelial cells before? Well, we'll talk about each of these. But these are somatic, which is another way of saying that these are all of our regular diploid cells. Right? Diploid. Another way of saying diploid is 2N. We have twice the normal number of chromosomes. In a human, all of your somatic cells have how many chromosomes? 46, which is 2 copies of the 23 unique chromosomes. And then, of course, there is a 5th category, sex cells. And these are obviously haploid. Another way of saying they're haploid is that they're just N or 1N. Yes? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to briefly go through each of these. And when I say briefly, I mean I got to keep it brief, so don't let me get sidetracked. Holding you responsible. If I get off topic, it's Max's fault. Yes. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So let's talk muscle cells. Really quickly, what's true about a muscle cell? Yep.
It makes muscle.
Okay. I mean, saying muscle cells are muscles is true. I'm not going to write it, but it is true. Absolutely. They are muscles, or more accurately, muscles are made of muscle cells. So no. That's okay. What is true? What do your muscles do?
They move.
Yeah, they move. Yeah, very good. They move. And the only way they can actually move is by, you just said, contraction. That's all they do. That's all they do. All of your motion comes from the fact that you take a muscle and you bind it to this bone and to that bone, and then that muscle is designed to get shorter. And if that muscle gets shorter, then this bone has to get closer to this bone, right? That's what happens. And then you have one down here that's designed to do the exact opposite. So it gets shorter, in which case this bone has to get closer to this bone this way, and now it moves that way. And that's just every bone in your body is just a thing that can get shorter, which then causes 2 things to get closer to each other. And in most cases, that happens at some sort of hinged joint, so you make angles that change, right? And that's it. So you have some that pivot and a few other things, but basically, that's all it is. A muscle is cells that contain proteins There's a bunch of proteins involved, but the two major ones are called actin and myosin. And actin and myosin that contract in length when given a stimulus. So a muscle cell, they tend to be these sort of longer cells like this. And it's actually pretty cool. You have this filament of what we call actin, which basically looks sort of like this. And then you have this other filament called myosin, and it sort of looks like that. And then when stimulated, these bridge against each other. So what will happen is that this one's going to move this way, is going to pull towards that way, while this one pulls itself that way. And they do that literally by, it's called cross-bridge cycling, but basically it's they walk up against each other. So these will bind to each other, and that's designed that this one always wants to bind to the next one in that direction, and that one always wants to bind to the next one in this direction. And so every time you feed it a little bit of energy, it just grabs onto the next loop, and it's like monkey bars. Does that make sense? So they pull against each other. And when they do that, for that to happen, because they're both bound to an end of the cell has to get, if these pull towards each other, what's going to happen to the cell? It's going to get shorter, right? What else can it do? It's got to get shorter because these things are being pulled in almost like a winch against each other. And that is what happens when a muscle contracts. And then all that happens when the muscle relaxes is that process undoes itself. Does that make sense? This is the basic mechanism of muscle contraction. And a muscle cell contracts that way, and then all a muscle is millions of muscle cells. And if all the cells in the muscle shorten, then what's going to happen to the muscle itself? It's going to shorten. And why does it puff up like that? Well, it's still got the same amount of fluid inside of it. So if you compress it this way, it's going to have to expand that way, which is why when you contract your muscles, they expand, they bulge, they get bigger, right? Then when you relax them, they unbulge. And some of us obviously have very large muscle bulges because we're very muscly, and others of you are much weaker, and I understand that. Not everyone's an athlete like I am. I get it. Third thing people notice about me, like that guy. I just finished noticing how tough he is, and it occurs to me now that he must be tough because he's such a great athlete. Top ever. Just better than all the other volleyball players. Sometimes, like I like to not show that off because I don't want to make you guys feel bad, so I try to just be kind of mediocre.
You try to be humble.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Like when you're as good as I am, you don't have to be. I have to be good in front of you. I know how good I am, so I can just lay off a little bit, right? I understand. Yeah, sure. No, and I really believe this too. This is definitely an expression of my actual belief. There's two main types of muscle cells. What are they? Do we know? Do we recall? You should have learned this in grade 10. It's probably been a long time for you. Where do you find your muscles? There's two distinct places in your body you find muscles. Yep. Arms, legs, fingers, toes, neck, attached to your bones. What do we call your bones all together? Skeleton. So we call these muscles skeletal or skeletal. Yeah, either or. Okay, so the first one would be skeletal muscles, or skeletal, I suppose. And the second type, does anyone know? Where else do you find muscles in your body? Sure. No, absolutely. What's one example of an organ that definitely has lots of muscle? Lungs, interesting. Do your lungs have any muscle at all? You should have learned this last year. Did you learn how your lungs work? How do they work? If your lungs come through your nasal cavity, you should definitely consult a doctor. If at any point you find your lungs coming through your nasal cavity, I'm going to implore you to seek medical help.
They use like the alveoli or whatever.
They don't use the alveoli. That's what your lungs are. Your lungs are just a big bunch of sacs called alveoli, surrounded by blood vessels.
And they like
They shrink to push out air, and then they expand.
What shrinks and expands?
your diaphragm.
What's your diaphragm? Is it part of the lungs? No. So how does your diaphragm make your lungs expand and contract? Do you guys like build model lungs?
No.
Did you not?
No.
Oh, maybe we will. That's fun. That's a lab I usually do with my grade 10s. Did we, Kira, do that? Did we build lungs? You sure you were in my grade 10 science class? Yeah, you were. Yeah, interesting. I always do the model lung build. I wonder if you're just away that day. I might even have some still left in the back. We'll talk about that one day. But long story short, yeah, your diaphragm is actually a muscle that has nothing to do with your lungs. So your lungs are a rare bad choice because they actually don't have any muscle in them. They're a passive organ, which is interesting. But what's a big one that is working all the time? It's working right now. Your heart. Good. What else? No. No. All your intestinal tract, right? Your whole alimentary canal, right? Like, how does food move down your esophagus? What's the process? Yeah, the esophagus itself is a muscle, right? And it just contracts like a tube of toothpaste behind the food all the time, pushes it along. And it goes into your stomach, and your stomach is just 3 layers of muscle that just squeeze and churn that food. And it goes into your intestines, and your intestines are just like your esophagus. They're just a tubular muscle that's always squeezing behind the food that's been processed to force it all the way down, right? Does anyone remember what that process is called? Sorry? Yeah, your uterus is just a big, enormous muscle that's going to have to push a big 7 to 12 pound object out of your own body, right? Yeah, takes a lot of muscles. You're welcome. God, like I can't even imagine. I am so incredibly sympathetic, but fundamentally incapable of being empathetic about that. Like that's just no, honestly, right? Like just obviously, like I will never have to deal with. But like that seems very, and like I've obviously my wife's a midwife, so I like deal with this a lot. And you just think like, you know what I will never have to do? Push another living being out of my body. And I'm thankful for that. But I am. I think like I am glad that that's something I'm never going to have to do. But I am also, I feel very fortunate. I feel that, there's a whole half of the population who may have to do that and do so, to willingly keep the species going. But you think like that's, thanks, I guess. This is why on my birthday, and this is dead true, this is why on my birthday every year, since my wife became a midwife and I've become wiser of these things, every year on my birthday I always send my mother a bouquet of roses. Because I always think like, you know what I did that day? Nothing. I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing. I was just like, I was inside a body, then I was outside a body, and I probably cried a bunch and kept everyone awake. Right? Like this is my assumption. Because I'm attention seeking now. I was probably attention seeking then. But like she had to push me out of her body, right? So I sent her flowers. I think like that's a classy move. You should do that too.
My brother gave my mom this really cute necklace.
Oh, I love that.
It was so expensive. It had a cute message on it that he did not write at all.
No, but he
just put his name at the bottom.
sure, but all the same, that's like whatever. Not everyone has to be a great writer. That's very sweet. I love that. You should listen. Even irrespective of how good your mother is as being like a mother now. The fact that maybe the best, maybe the worst, but at a bare minimum, you should appreciate the fact that she had to carry you around in her body for 9 months or 8 months or 10 months, whatever the number may have been, and had to shove her out. And again, irrespective of, lots can happen between the day of birth and today. So I'm not saying you got to be like, hey mom, you're the best, but at a bare minimum, you can be like, hey mom, thank you for pushing me out of your body, or alternately having me cut out of your body, which also seems very unpleasant. Does that make sense? Anyway, we'll move on. All right, so skeletal muscle, and then the other type is called smooth muscle. Smooth muscle. I mean, one would assume. It is actually. It's because skeletal muscle has this very distinct striated pattern to it. In other words, if you look at the tissue of skeletal muscle, it's very much striped. Like you see the lines of tubes, and smooth muscle, as the name would imply, just doesn't have that same feature. So skeletal muscle attaches to the skeleton, hence the name. Sorry, I'll let them know. I'll be like, hi, skeletal muscles, it's Joe calling. I just wanted to let you know that Saphira thinks your name sucks. All right, well, anyway, you keep on contracting, you, and then I'll hang up my telephone on which I'm able to phone all of the skeletal muscles in the world, Saphira. And they're responsible for moving the body. Smooth muscles surround structures. And they can basically squeeze open and close.
Mr. Orlando?
Speaking. Yep,
Can you just switch to your example, please?
I can.
Thank you.
There we go. Is this bad boy? Is this a brand new one? Do we have cinches by chance? Or I got to make a Canadian Tire run?
Cinches?
Yeah, like, because this we need to shorten it, right? Yeah, that's fine. I can do a Canadian Tire run.
You sure?
Oh, sure. Thank you, you as well. Shh, quiet. Okay, so that's muscle cells. What's our next type of cell? We're doing like just a real barnstorm through types today. Cool, we'll do. But we need the heavy duty ones. Like you gotta kind of go to town. It's all good. I'm on. What's our second type? Nerve cells, nervous cells. Good.
Why are they nervous?
Because they kept interrupting me. And they're right to be nervous. All right. What do nerve cells do?
They help you. They connect you.
Yep.
They connect your brain and muscles.
Yep. Absolutely. Those are all things they do for sure. 100%. Those are all good examples. More generally speaking, they send and receive electrochemical signals. Ask anyone taking grade 12 biology right now. What you're going to learn is you can't do one without the other. They're all interrelated. So nerve cells send and receive electrochemical signals. More broadly then, they're used to transmit and process information. These cells are called neurons. You heard that term before? Excellent. And where are they found? Yep. Found in the brain, nerves, spinal cord, and integrated into other organs. Relax. So, for example, your heart has nervous tissue that regulates when it beats and when it doesn't. Does anyone know what that's called? We call it its technical name is the sinoatrial node, but you would know it as the. Sometimes people have to get replaced because it's not working. Artificial one can be put in. Pacemaker. Heard that before? Yeah, your heart's pacemaker is a set of tissues, nervous tissues, that control how much it beats. We'll get more into this later, but it literally has. I'm going to draw later. Any chance I get to not have to draw, I'm going to take. Our third type is, connective cells, which do exactly what they sound. They connect. They both hold cells together and allow the transmission of things from one cell to another. So these hold tissues together and facilitate movement of materials between them. They don't have to do both. Not every connective tissue holds tissues together, and not every connective tissue facilitates movement of materials between them. What are some examples? What's cartilage? Yep.
It's the muscle that connects to your bones at a joint.
Yeah, it's not muscle, but it is the tissue that connects bones together at your joint. That's a place we find it. We call that hyaline cartilage. Absolutely true. Where else do we find cartilage? Yeah, so it can just be structural in its own regard, right? So we have your ears, if you feel that tough tissue there. It's not bony, but it's also not just skin, right? What you're feeling is cartilage. Yeah.
How are tissues and muscles different?
What are adipose cells? Another term for that? Do you know? Fat cells, right? So we all have adipose tissue. It's important. It acts as cushioning. It acts as thermal insulation. It acts as lubrication between muscles and joints, and muscles and bones, and bones and bones. We have blood cells, bone cells, ligaments, tendons. What's a ligament and a tendon? Yep. Yeah, well, they actually connect either muscle to bone or muscle to muscle. Which does which? Anyone know? Opposite. So tendons, no muscle can work if it's not anchored to a bone, right? So every one of your muscles that moves your body has to have a tendon on each side of it that connects it to the necessary bone. If you're interested in that stuff, you should take kinesiology. Great course, great interesting material to be covered.
And they said that if there's not enough people who sign up for it, they might not do it at all.
Yeah, so you should definitely sign up. Yep. Yeah, again, anywhere you have a muscle that moves something, it's like the Achilles tendon is enormous, right? That connects the muscles of your lower leg to your ankle, right? That allows all that motion. Okay, what are epithelial cells? Does anyone know? Epithelium. For example, you have, right now, your epidermis is exposed. Yeah, every one of your epidermises is showing right now, which is, of course, what? No. Yeah, the outer layer of your skin.
Oh.
Right? Epi meaning outer layer, dermis meaning skin. So epidermis meaning outer layer of skin. Epithelial is protective tissue. It tends to be the outermost layer of things, hence the name. So protective tissues. You have what's called the pericardium. This is a membrane of tough tissue that surrounds your heart to protect it from the outside world. You have epithelial tissue lining any place your body is exposed to the outside world, right? So your skin is obviously an example, but there's an epithelial layer of your eyes. There's an epithelial layer all through your alimentary canal, right? Because all of your, like, from mouth to esophagus to stomach to intestines to rectum to anus, all of that is exposed to the outside world. So anywhere that the cells of your body can interact with the outside world, you have a tough layer of tissue that protects it from damage, both physical, chemical, and microbial. Does that make sense? Protects us from bacteria, from fungus, from viruses, and from whatever. So protective tissues, they're tough, durable, they're designed to be short-lived. So they're designed to take a beating and keep going right until they don't keep going, and then they're designed to be replaced. That's how I feel about teachers. Tough and we're durable and we're short-lived, and then they replace us. They line structures to protect them. No. No, pointedly they aren't. Otherwise, we would just have one type of cell and it would be epithelial. We have 4 types of cells, and one of them is epithelial. For example, most of your heart is made of muscle cells and pacemaker cells and connective cells, but it has a layer outside of it called the pericardium, whose job is just protective, and that's epithelial tissue. Does that make sense? Likewise, your skin actually has layers below just the outermost portion, which is tough, which is much more tender and does other functions, sweat glands, all these sorts of things. You've seen that exposed if you've badly scraped your skin before, right? It's different. It's not tough and protective. It has other functions. But the outer layer of your skin, the epidermis, is designed to protect you, and that is tough, and that's the epithelial portion of your skin. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question? Cool. And then the last thing, I'm not going to talk about sex cells for now, but I do want to talk about stem cells. What's a stem cell? What is a stem cell? Yeah. Yeah, it's an unspecialized cell, or maybe in a lot of cases in your body, a partially specialized cell that can be used to undergo mitosis and make new cells for your body. In other words, if your cell wants to make new epidermis, do we want to use the existing epidermis cells and have them replicate? What's the danger there? The whole point of your epidermis is that it's constantly being exposed to all the dangerous stuff, right? Bacteria, viruses. So if your cells could have a virus, do we want them reproducing? No, right? Well, what's going to come into contact with the most viruses? Your skin, right? So our skin cells don't reproduce, right? They also come into most contact with UV damage and things like that. They are busy. Their purpose is to protect you. Our brain cells don't reproduce because we need them to keep being brain cells. So we can't have them cutting themselves in half. Do you know what I mean? They also have really big, complicated shapes. It'd be really complicated to cut them in half. Our muscle cells can't be cutting themselves in half. They're full of all these proteins that shorten and contract. Does that make sense? So those cells don't cut in half. Those cells don't undergo mitosis. Instead, our body is full of a whole class of cells whose only job is to undergo mitosis so that their daughter cells, some of their daughter cells will remain stem cells for the next generation of new cells to be made, and some of their daughter cells will go off and specialize. Does that make sense? And it actually gets even more complicated than that, where you'll have a set of cells that are stem cells, but they're already partially specialized. The stem cells that will only become new skin tissues, for example. You'll have another set of stem cells that can only become new heart muscle cells. But we also have what are called pluripotent stem cells that can literally become any kind of cell. And within a few generations, if required to, they can undergo mitosis and become brain cells or muscle cells or whatever. Does that kind of make sense? So, stem cells are unspecialized or partially specialized cells And the note there would just be that most specialized cells do not undergo mitosis. Fun fact about cells, it's spelled with an S, not a D. All right, I just want to do a quick look at the org chart of cells in the body. Which is, inside the human body, you can have a specific cell. Here it is. Look at me. I'm a lovely cell. Oh, there I am. Okay. So we have cells. A group of cells working together that are all the same type, we call what? Tissues. Very good. And a bunch of different tissues can work together, all together, to form that's my attempt at a biologically accurate heart, if you're wondering. Don't judge me. What do we call a group of tissues working together? Before that, actually. An organ, right? You put a bunch of different tissues together, they can function as an organ, so they all have one task. Now, what if we put a bunch of different organs together so that they're all working together? So what if we had, I don't know, what if we had the heart? This is a heart, if you couldn't tell. Look at it, it's red, so you can tell it's a heart. I used to have a pencil tool, and I could draw a pencil. Now I don't. So what if we had the heart here? Oh, look, it's a heart. Okay. And then around the heart, we had the lungs. You'll be shocked to hear there's several inaccuracies to this drawing. And then, just like in real life, you've got the trachea, it's green. If your trachea is not green, bless you. If you look down your throat and it's not bright green, you need to consult a doctor, of course. Right? So all those organs working together form what we call an organ system, right? And then you put all those organ systems together, eventually you can make a ewe, which is to say an animal. What's a ewe? Is a ewe a female sheep? A ewe is a female sheep, right? Ewes and rams? Can somebody look that up? You have my blessing. Look it up. And of course we call this an organism. That's right. Is it EWE? Okay, it's a female sheep, right? And the male is called a ram. See, I pay attention. Yes. All right, here's your homework. Here's your homework. I want you to list all of the organ systems of the human body. Not that many. No, you can write it with your pencil. Well, that's a whole different discussion, wouldn't we agree? But yes, I suppose you can take a picture of it then. But I'm going to throw my stapler at you. And you can grade me on that. You can say that was an 88% throwing your stapler at me, Orlando. Yep.
I just wanted to ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like the answer.
No, that's cool. So we could say, like, give a couple. Circulatory. These are the obvious ones. What's another obvious one? Reproductive. Yeah, but find the rest, all right? See what you can find. Oh, good. I've got a volleyball net to fix.
Is that not the rental people?
No, we're gonna give the current crappy ones we have to them, and then this will be for us. Oh, yeah, of course.
It makes sense.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they were the ones who like.
Yeah, no, you don't get like.
Like the sticks are falling out of it. It's horrible.
Yeah, they're a bunch of freaking mutants. That's what they are. And if you're watching my lesson right now, people who rent our volleyball court, I stand by it. I meant exactly what I said.